Yeah, okay, so a few elements of housekeeping. As I mentioned earlier, as some of you probably heard, please do keep yourselves on mute while people are presenting. But there will be an opportunity later in the session to unmute and all discuss things all together. So yeah, if you could just keep yourself on mute while people are talking, that would be brilliant. When you wiggle your mouse, some of you, I'm sure, have already found this, you should get this bar that you can now see on the slide. And that gives you all the different functions within Teams. Those of you who have got a chat function, I would really recommend keeping it open. We are going to be using some polls, so these will appear in the chat. Yeah, as I mentioned as well, if you need to use the raise your hand function to get our attention, please do. And as I said before, Sarah will be moderating the chat. So if you do have any questions as we're going through, just let her know and she'll do her best to answer. Just to let you know, this session is being recorded as we're going to share it on our website, so as many people as possible can get involved, really. So let's kick off with a bit of a poll to get your brains in gear. Oh, my GIF doesn't work. Oh, that's a shame. So what percentage of people in the UK do you think get their news from online sources? Hopefully you should see a poll appear in the chat soon and you should be able to answer that. And what will happen is the results should come through live so we can get people's opinions on this. There we go. So you should be able to tell us which percentage of people, what percentage of the UK get their news from online sources? Take a guess. Can everyone see that in the chat function? Yep, we've got a response. Brilliant. Any other thoughts? We've got 3 thoughts so far. Oh, you can't vote in browser. Oh, that's annoying. Feel free to type the answer if you prefer. Okay, the poll function doesn't like browser version, obviously. Okay, we've got quite a mix of guesses here. I'm going to say that most people seem to be leaning towards the 83 by the looks of things. So the answer is in fact mainly from online sources is the aim of this one. It's in fact 77%. It's quite interesting if you look at it. I think we all expected online sources probably to be quite high. I don't know whether people expected print media now to only be 22% from this year, which is pretty low. And even TV is only 55% as the main source of news. Although there was a note in this research that said during coronavirus, this has massively increased the amount of people who are getting their news from the TV. So you can read it different ways, I suppose. Right, okay, now hopefully we're all used to using Teams and we've found out some interesting quirks. I'm going to stop talking now and hand over to my colleague Lee.
Thanks very much, Heather. Good morning to everyone. Hopefully you can all hear me too. The problems are not going to be too intrusive for us. And it's good to see so many of you at our first online event. As Heather says, my name is Lee. So I'll just move the slide along. I'm a senior communications manager here at the national agency, but as you can now see on screen, I'm here to talk to you today because before moving into communications work, I was a journalist for 30 years, working with sort of weekly and regional newspapers. You can see some of the biggest sort of titles I worked for there on screen, and if you're from the West Midlands or Wales, you'll probably recognise some of them. So based on that experience, I'm here to talk to you about sort of working with the media, give you some tips and hints on writing press releases and hopefully getting your projects featured in newspapers, online, who knows, maybe on radio, television also. So the first thing you need to think about when you're considering approaching the media is whether you've actually got a story. Obviously, your projects are all very interesting to you, but really you need to consider whether what you've got to say, what you want to publicise, is going to be interesting to the journalists you're trying to reach, and most importantly for them, whether it's also going to be interesting to their readers. Something can be newsworthy for a number of reasons, and the more of those that apply to the information you want to impart, obviously the better chance you've got of gaining some coverage. The key things to consider are, is it timely? Primarily, old news is not news. You need to be talking about something that's just happened, is happening now, or about to happen. Secondly, is it local? Which is fairly obvious, really. There's not a lot of point in sending your well-crafted press release about your project in Plymouth to the Newcastle Journal, for instance, obviously. So you need to bear in mind the locality. And thirdly, does it have impact? Obviously, the more people that are potentially affected by something or influenced by something, the more newsworthy it becomes. And sort of following on from that, and as sort of an extension of that, is it also useful? Is what you want to share sort of offering some vital information to readers, offering sort of information that will help them, help their community? Is it addressing an issue or concern they might have personally or for their community? All of that sort of, will help generate interest and make your story more sellable, as it were. Human interest is also a key factor in getting a journalist interested in any story. If your story is likely to create an emotional reaction in people, be that sort of happiness, anger, please them, also any emotional reaction, that they're more likely to be interested in reading further. Again, so all that is important. And similarly, by including quotations from people who are sharing their experiences, that adds a human face to your story, and is something which equally will make it more interesting. And the last thing sort of I've noted down to consider here is it prominent? And by that I sort of mean, are there people involved, organisations involved, businesses involved, which already have a standing within the community or whatever audience you're seeking to reach? Clearly, sort of people who are better known or well known within any locality or population are more newsworthy, and similarly with well-known organisations. I mean, we could be talking about, I guess, in our context, universities, schools. They will all have standing in the community, and people in the community will be interested in what they're saying and doing, so that will make you more newsworthy. Bearing all of this in mind, what might news look like in Erasmus Plus? What would be the best opportunities to try to generate some publicity for your project? And generally, press releases would be best issued around key milestones or events in your project's life cycle, really. This could be from the very start, when you first learn that you've successfully been granted your funding, when you launch your project, if you have launch events, before, during or after mobilities, any subsequent events that might be held during your project life cycle, whether you're having conferences, workshops, etc. And then obviously the conclusion of your project, if you've had a successful project and at the conclusion you're able to offer sort of material outputs or can show that there are tangible benefits for participants, for your organisation or for the community. All of these things might make sort of nice stories for the local press. So on. Sorry, too quickly. So once you've considered all of those things and decided that yes, you probably do have a story, how do you go about writing your press release, and how do you go about getting it in front of a journalist and getting the journalist's attention? I think the first thing you need to consider is that newsrooms these days are incredibly busy places. Reporters are sort of under almost constant pressure to generate stories and create content, not only for newspapers these days, but as we learned in the opening question, for online channels, for websites, and equally in the broadcast sector. And obviously with 24-hour television and radio now, they need to meet 24-hour news cycles. Equally and similarly to most other industries, they're being asked to do that quite often with fewer resources. Like the news media is not immune to the current economic vagaries, and many of them have made cuts in recent years, so fewer journalists are effectively being asked to produce more stories. So if you're able to help them in any way to do that, you're increasing your chances of gaining coverage. And the way to do that is essentially really to provide them with something that's publication ready, something that has little or no need for editing, that unless they desperately feel the need to, doesn't necessarily need any follow-up questions or inquiries, that is provided with, where applicable, suitable pictures, suitable video content. All of that sort of makes it easier for them to use your material to effectively, just cut and paste it into their newspaper or onto their website. If you can do that, your chances of getting your press release used obviously will increase. And to achieve that effectively, it means you write your press release as a journalist would write it. So, which means it needs to be factual, with checkable sources and properly attributed quotes. Contrary to what seems to be increasingly popular opinion, the news media, certainly outside of the national media, they're not biased. They don't print falsehoods or report falsehoods. Everything needs to be factual. Everything needs to be verifiable. People who are quoted need to be real people who are properly named, full name, not just Christian name, and their posts and their relevance to the content. Similarly, things need to be brief and to the point. 250 to 350 words is usually the optimal length, certainly for print publications. And you need to be using short paragraphs and easy to understand, plain English. Most news stories actually follow a similar formula that's known as top-down writing, or the inverted pyramid structure, which you can see on screen there now. And in this method, all of the key facts are included at the very start of the text, and then the further down you read, the additional details and information gradually becomes less important or less relevant. So in order to achieve that publication ready state, it makes sense for you to take the same approach when you're writing your press release. As you can see there, the key facts to include are the 5 W's: who, what, where, when, why, as well as how, if you can. And so you need to be selective, leave out non-essential, irrelevant, or simply uninteresting information. Cut the waffle, basically. And you need to select quotes carefully to make sure that they're backing up the facts, as well as adding that human element to the story. You'll also need to to include a headline at the top of your press release and to add some notes for editors at the bottom. These are not for publication, but are generally a little bit of information, again, brief information about your organisation or your project, which is for the journalists' information and sort of adds a little bit of context to the press release for them. The key part of any news story, and therefore what should be the key part of your press release, is the first paragraph, or the intro as it's known for by journalists, rather, introduction. You know, this is what needs to grab the journalist's attention, and what they need to see will grab their readers' attention and encourage them to read on. It's normally, it needs to be short and snappy, to the point. It needs to answer, well, at least 2, but as many as those 5 W's as you can. Really good ones will normally answer all of them. Generally speaking, it is just 1 sentence and 25 words really is the absolute, well, not the absolute maximum for ideally. I mean, doing that and developing the ability to recognise those key facts and include them in that first paragraph and get it down to 25 words is a little bit of a skill, but the more you do it, the easier it should become, and it shouldn't be beyond the realms of most people. You know, and it will certainly help your press release in terms of getting it potentially published, if you can achieve that. I mean, effectively, it should be a paragraph which, if people were to read it on its own, it would stand alone. It could be read without the rest of the story, and they'd still have a good idea of what the story was. So once you've got your press release written and a good story and a good intro, how do you get it into the media's inbox? How do you get it in front of a journalist? You need to start off by obviously researching the media outlets that you're looking to target, understand their audiences, and be sort of reasonably confident that the audiences that you want to reach are the same as their audiences. So obviously you do that research online, look at, you know, and identify the relevant outlets that you were looking to gain coverage in. I mean, these could be obviously local, regional, national newspapers, but also specialist titles, sector relevant titles, niche titles, and obviously they could be print or broadcast as well. I would say at this stage, don't forget digital also. Increasingly sort of specialist sector related news outlets and niche outlets are online, and also throughout the country now there's a trend for local and what are known as hyper local news websites springing up in local areas, all of which could prove sort of fruitful outlets for the sort of information that we're probably trying to get published most of the time. Excuse me. So once you've identified the sort of organisations, take a look at their websites and see if they've got prescribed methods of contact. Some of them will probably have contact us forms. Some of them may have dedicated email addresses for submitting news stories, as well as just their general email addresses. Some of the larger ones would possibly have lists of reporters and their specialisms, which is particularly useful because if you can at all, it's particularly beneficial to target the relevant journalists, which I think in most cases with the sort of content we will be talking about is probably going to be the education correspondent or the community journalist. If that sort of information isn't on the outlet's website, it might be worth calling beforehand, telling them what sort of press release you've got and what the subject is, and ask who the most relevant sort of reporter is to send it to. So once you've done that and you know who you're sending your press release to, it's essential to include a contact telephone number, not just an email address. You know, should a journalist decide that they want to follow up in person and develop the story further, they will want to be in touch quickly. So a telephone number is really essential for that. And if that is the case, you need to make sure that you're available, and obviously people, other people that are involved in the story are available for potential follow-up interviews, photography and filming potentially as well. And if that's required, also really you need to be making sure that arrangements are in place for that to be facilitated quite quickly. As I say, the news is happening now. The journalists will want to get everything in the bag quite quickly. If your organisation is in the fortunate position of having a press office already, then obviously it makes sense to use them. They will have the relevant skills and knowledge and will be able to give you advice on all of this, and quite possibly even do some of it for you. Similarly, if colleagues in the organisation have existing relationships with reporters, it makes sense to try and leverage those too. But I think it's important to sort of point out at this stage that you also need to be prepared to be disappointed, be prepared to be ignored. Most newsrooms will receive a vast amount of press releases on a daily basis, and the bigger the organisation, the more they will receive. Most of them won't be picked up or used for a number of reasons, possibly because they're not deemed suitable. People might be too busy to follow up or to action them, or quite often, as is the case obviously in a news organisation, a major news story might be breaking, which is taking priority, taking up more resource and more time. So there aren't people, again, available to follow up the press release. I think the thing to keep in mind there is to don't get disheartened, don't give up. You know, it's nothing personal. And the next time you have a story, and the next time you try to submit a press release to the same organisation, potentially the outcome could be entirely different. And equally, when you do manage to get some coverage, it's certainly well worthwhile. You know, getting your organisation or your project featured in the media will boost the profile of your organisation. It provides some well-deserved recognition for the efforts of those involved, who will obviously also love to see themselves in the newspaper or on an external website. But equally, it gives you additional content to boost your own promotional efforts. You know, you can publish links to the coverage on your website, on your social media channels, and if you've been featured on radio and television, in that regard, it's always worth asking if there is a recording available which you can share on your own channels. So the benefits of the coverage will certainly, I think, make the effort worthwhile and make the potential disappointments, if you've had them, worthwhile. You know, your press release isn't going to be picked up every time. Not all of them will be picked up, but when they do, I think it's certainly beneficial and well worth the effort. It's probably not quite true to the old adage that all publicity is good publicity. I don't think we could say that, but certainly most publicity is good publicity, and the benefits outweigh the pitfalls or the possibility that you might have put in some effort occasionally to a press release that isn't going to be picked up. Okay, that was a very quick overview, really, and it's by no means exhaustive, but there are plenty of resources online which you can use, which will probably explain things much better than I have. And obviously, the first place to start would be our Erasmus Plus website. There we have on there a press pack, which if you go to the Manage Your Grant page and navigate to promotion and dissemination, scroll down to resources, you'll find the press pack there. This includes a guidance document which goes over the things I've just outlined in a bit more detail, and things such as a template press release, which you can take and use, just adapt the content that's on there to fit your own circumstances, and other documents that you might find useful, including a template consent form, because you will also need to gain and record the consent of anyone that you might want to feature in any publicity. So there's a template consent form in there as well. Similarly, on our website, you might want to take a look at our projects in the news page. This is updated monthly and is a roundup of all the projects during the previous months that have been in the news, as the name suggests. So there you'll get an idea of what sort of content has been successful for other beneficiaries, what sort of projects have been making the news, and what sort of news outlets that they've been appearing in, which should give you ideas of how best to proceed yourselves. Then beyond sort of obviously our website, there are countless organisations really that will have resources and provide resources online, but we'd recommend the Media Trust and Charity Comms, both of which you'll find online, and have some really useful resources that could help you out in this area. And that really is the end of my little spiel. Thank you for listening. I hope you found it useful. And if anyone has any questions at this stage, I'm happy to try and answer them. Anyone? Either ask questions in the chat if you can access it, put your hand up, or even if you're brave enough, turn your camera on and ask me a question face to face.
Hi, I'd just like to agree with what you're saying. I used to work for quite a large voluntary organisation, and we did have a press officer, and it makes a huge amount of difference. I know many of us can't afford them, but we did get lots and lots of coverage. We kept ourselves up there all the time, and she was information and press officer. That she was really good at her job, and it made a huge difference because there's only a Scotland-wide organisation, but we did get coverage across the UK as well. And I mean, I wish we could afford one we can, but it does work. It really does work if you have the resources. It makes a huge difference.
Yeah, sorry, mate, you broke up a little bit at the end there, Marag. Yeah, but yeah, I would agree. As I said, if your organisation has a dedicated either department, or even if it's just one person, obviously they will have those skills and they're there to do that, and they can help you in lots of ways, and possibly write your release for you, etc., etc. You know, if you're in the fortunate position of having that resource, certainly make use of it.
Yeah. And she was also policy as well, so it was a triple role, and they all related to each other as a campaigning as well as a service delivery organisation.
Yeah, I think quite often you find that comms people, especially in I don't know what your organisation is, its structure, but in smaller organisations, comms people quite often take on other roles as well, and it's a skill. You know, people who maybe co-opted into doing the comms because they might have done it in a previous life, or etc., etc. But yeah, if your organisation can at all afford it, it's worth investing in that resource, because as I said, the benefits of the publicity ultimately will make it worthwhile. And then obviously, you know, there are various freelance providers out there who can do that for you as well if you can't take it in-house. There are, you know, freelance copywriters up and down the country, many former journalists or comms people that have left the newspaper industry, and they're all keen to do work and obviously have connections within the media industry. But obviously each organisation is different, and there will be a cost implication in doing that.
Yep. That was very helpful, thanks. It's good to refresh these things.
Lee, there's one question for you in the chat box as well from Leela, saying, would you recommend using real names or not for participants because of ethics restrictions?
Yeah, it's a delicate situation. I mean, I don't quite know what the ethics restrictions you're referring to are. As I said in the presentation, to retain credibility, really, as I said, it's always best practice to give people's full names and either their post or their involvement, or describe what their involvement or relevance to the content is. If purely because we live in a world where people are sometimes, unfortunately, skeptical about what's printed in newspapers and on websites, and maybe even on your organisation website rather than an external outlet. And if you just publish a testimonial or a quote from Peter or John, or what's to say you've not just made that up? I mean, equally, you could create a totally fictitious full name and position and make it up. But I mean, adding a full name and a position, etc., lends more credibility. However, equally, if you're in a position where there are care issues or protection issues for vulnerable people, vulnerable children, etc., etc., I think it's fair to say, and you frequently do see it on television when people are silhouetted, and on newspapers, if you explain that the names have been changed to protect the individuals involved, then that would be the way around that. And I think then that if you explain why you're only given a Christian name, and it's because for purposes of protecting the identity of the person involved, if that's required, then that's not unusual in the media. But just for general promotional purposes, and if there are no issues like that, then it's best practice to give people a full name and fully attribute them. Does that answer the question?
I think that's great. Does anyone else have any more questions? No? Well, if you do, feel free to keep adding them into the chat box. We can always come back to them later as well. For now, though, let's move over. Thank you very much for that, Lee. Let's take a look at, if I can pull it up, yes, there we go. Some case studies. So now that we've heard the journalists' side of things, I think it would be good also to hear what some of our beneficiaries have to say who have had their projects in the news. If we start off with Elaine McKeon from Southeastern Regional College, you can see some examples here on the screen of where Southeastern Regional College have managed to get their projects into the news. Some nice examples there, I think. Elaine, if it's okay with you, I think I might stop sharing the presentation actually, because then I think we might be able to see you a bit better if you're happy to put on your camera and your mic.
Sure, mic's on. Hopefully you can hear me. Can you hear me okay? Yeah.
I can hear you fine.
Okay, camera's going on.
Brilliant, thank you.
Is that, I'm not sure if that's working. I've been having problems with the camera, so can you see me?
Got a bit of a black square,
No.
I think. Don't worry,
gosh.
if it's not working, it's not working, don't worry.
I don't know what's happening with it. Let me see if I can do something with this.
There's not a camera cover or anything?
No. It's been playing up because right, okay, let's have a look and see what's happening. Right.
Don't worry too much though. I'm sure everyone everyone's happy with just hearing your voice, I'm sure.
Okay, so let me just move this out of the way. Okay.
Do you want to start off with just telling us a little bit about your organisation and your involvement in Erasmus Plus?
Sure. Okay, so as Heather said, my name is Elaine McKeon and I am International Development Manager in Southeastern Regional College in Northern Ireland. We're based in the southeast part of Northern Ireland, from Belfast down south of Belfast to the border and across to the east coast. So we have 4 main campuses. We have 980 staff, about 15,000 students. So we're quite a large college, and we're in the top 20 colleges in the UK.
Brilliant. And how about your involvement with Erasmus Plus?
Yep. So I have been with the college now for just over 3 years, and I manage all the Erasmus Plus projects within the college. So we have Key Action 1 FE Vet, we have Key Action 1 Higher Education for staff mobility, we have Key Action 1 Higher Education International Credit Mobility, so that allows us to participate in projects outside Europe. At the moment, we have a project which is running in the Kyrgyz Republic, Tajikistan and Turkmenistan. And we also have a number of Key Action 2 transnational projects. We tend not to lead on those, but we're quite happy to partner. So it's quite a busy office, and impact and dissemination is not only a requirement, but it's something which is really important for us as a college. We're very, very proactive in terms of our media, and promoting international is a key aspect of that.
So what is the college's overall approach to working with the media?
So the college is traditionally, we're originally community based. So we originally had 26 colleges, believe it or not, in this little small part of the UK. We now have 6 larger colleges, but because they were community based, probably like other colleges across the country, we were very much steeped in the community. So linked with community projects, and anything that was going on in the college was always promoted. We've built on that over time. We amalgamated 7 years ago, and since then it brought 3 of those colleges together. So the management team have worked really hard to gel that into one big college and with one vision and one mission. So we have a dedicated communications marketing team, I'm very glad to say, and they're critical in, I suppose, engaging with our stakeholders to build our image. And a key element of that is our international activity. And our principal is very, very invested in international work. And we've worked across 40 different countries at the moment over the last 6 or 7 years. Our engagement in terms of international is very much based around the case study editorial. So the content would be around our student mobilities, about any maybe students that have been in mobility and have maybe achieved something. So we had a catering student who was in Valencia, and she went on to actually win a silver award at World Skills. So that was a lovely, nice development and a nice story to moving forward. So we promote things like that, key events, and so it's very much about building those relationships and working with our communications team, work really, really hard to develop those journalist relationships built on a very strong platform, but just develop that over time to include international, national press and sectoral press.
So what sort of press have you found yourself published in?
So we have been published in a number of different press. So social media and online media would be very active social and on our digital platforms, and we have a good, strong following and network. We've also featured in FE Vet. And that's with a project we're running at the moment with it's new skills for vet teachers. And then we recently had the similar story in FE News. But also British Council have been very kind, and they've published a couple of our case studies. Obviously, they've found them newsworthy and interesting. And our international partners, for any projects we're on, we encourage our international partners to disseminate the activity as well from their aspect. So we would be very proactive when it comes to the media.
And have you got any top tips that you could share in terms of writing a press release?
Yeah, so my top tips would be, well, as Lee said, is to keep it simple, stupid. Okay, so journalists don't know everything, and they certainly don't know everything about you and your project. So don't use flowery technical words. Keep it very, very simple, very straightforward. Keep your sentences short. Don't use acronyms because they don't know what they are. Always think about the reader. So who's reading this press release? What is going to be of interest to them, and write it to that particular person. Again, reinforcing what Lee said, use a headline that grabs the attention. So be fun, be creative, use puns, play on words. So for example, our catering students, who went to Valencia, I might say, students serve up a sizzler in the sun, or students are baking in Valencia. So just try to think of something which is maybe going to catch the attention. Again, same thing, summarize your story in the first couple of sentences. Very often journalists won't read any more than that. And quite often that's the only bit they will actually publish with your caption. Use your consistent formatting, as has been said before. If you're like myself and have corporate guidelines, that makes it so easy for you. Proofread. There's nothing worse than receiving a piece of information which has got typos in it that grammatically isn't correct, doesn't read. And of course now we're obliged to make it accessible. So the accessibility legislation, so run it through your accessibility tab on your Word document just to make sure that it is accessible. Always get the person that you're writing about to check for accuracy. And again, your data protection, get the consent to use it. And always, always, always provide a photograph with names and a caption. And the photograph doesn't have to be somebody sitting behind the desk looking at a computer screen. The more interesting it is, the more likely that it's going to catch the eye.
Brilliant.
I would say there it's better if it isn't images. It's better if they're not just people stood in rows or sat at a desk. The media are really looking for action. So if you're providing photos or video, it's better if it's people doing something than people sat around a desk or stood in a row. The typical check presentation type thing, that doesn't go down well.
Yeah, I think those were some really good tips actually there. There was a lot that was useful there.
And also don't forget, when you're using your social media, to tag British Council, Erasmus Plus, and any partners that you're in on that as well, because they will then pick that up and hopefully retweet it.
We do appreciate it when people do that.
I know.
Okay, so in terms of once you've got this sort of press coverage, do you notice that you get more interest in your projects following that?
Absolutely. Our approach to international development is very much around building partnerships with the view to sharing our best practice and also to gain from that. And we have found as the more active we are media-wise, the more cover we get. I get loads and loads of emails regularly for people, other organisations wanting to engage in partners, collaborations for maybe Key Action 2 projects or Key Action 3 projects. It just generally raises our profile, and yes, it does bring us a lot more opportunities. In fact, we've just put in a bid for the Skills for Prosperity Fund for Egypt, and that came about because of links that we had received because of some press coverage that we'd had. So you can be very, again, it's absolutely 100%. You will get more coverage and you will get more opportunities to get involved.
Brilliant. Any final pieces of advice you'd like to share?
I suppose when I've been marketing is my whole background, and I suppose from that aspect, it's just natural for me to do these things. It's not necessarily natural for everybody to think, oh, I must send out a press release, but just everything that you're doing, look at it and think, would somebody be interested in reading this story? Yes, there has to be something there. There has to be some sort of impact. But start with your local press. And if you don't have a marketing department the way we would have, if it's yourself or one other person, just contact them, speak to the journalists, get to know them, send them information, ask questions, I'll get them to. The more you have that relationship, the more likely they will take your press release. And a wee bit of advertising usually goes a long way as well. A bit of paid for stuff really helps.
Yeah, certainly. Does anyone have any questions for Elaine? No, feel free to type or talk, whichever you're more comfortable with. No? Okay. I think you must have done a good job then.
Cool.
No one's got any questions.
Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity. So that'll help with my dissemination. Oh,
good. No, I'm glad. Thank you very much for speaking to us and sharing your story. Anne, shall we speak to you?
Sure. Yeah. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, perfect.
Great. And you can see me?
Yes. So, sorry, just to introduce you, this is Anne Bailey from Form the Future CIC. And you can see a few examples as well on the screen now, hopefully, of where they've been featured in the news as well.
Great.
Okay, Anne, so do you want to give us a bit of an overview of your organisation and your Erasmus Plus experience?
Yes, sure. So Form the Future we're a little bit different. We are a social enterprise that works like a little bit like an EBP, Education Business Partnership. And our mission is to link schools and businesses to help students prepare for their future careers. So everything we do is about partnership working, and clearly raising our profile as an organization, and our mission is important to enable us to build those networks that allow us to do the things that we do. We were really attracted to this Erasmus project, and actually, like so much in life, you have to let people know what you're doing, what you're interested in, so that they come to you with ideas, a bit like the Skills for Prosperity for Egypt that we just heard about. Someone came to me and said, I've got an idea for an Erasmus project. I think you might be interested in getting involved. He was a former principal of one of our large sixth form colleges who was working as an educational consultant and had met someone at an event somewhere in Brussels. He was from Norway, and one thing led to another. Lo and behold, this idea for a potential Erasmus project came together. And what they wanted to do was, what the focus of our project is, it's called 21st Century Skills for 21st Century Needs. And it involves schools and affiliated organizations like ourselves from UK, Norway, Denmark, and Romania, all looking at how we can integrate the skills development that we feel students need to be able to be effective and successful in the 21st century local workforce, as it were, but how we can do it in a way that integrates it into the curriculum learning. So it's not an added extra, but it's integral to the way they learn. So that's the mission of the project. It's a 2-year project. We were going to be disseminating at our final conference in September. I don't think we've officially asked for an extension, but it is our plan to do so because of COVID, and because of the some of the challenges that schools have been facing. We need a little bit more time to do that, and practically it's just not going to make sense to hold an international conference in Romania in September. So that's the project, but we're well into it, you know, to the point that we're now working on our handbook. We are starting to really encapsulate everything we've done. And the hope will be that we will have a useful suite of resources and teacher training materials that we can use to share with anyone who's interested in this in our project. That's the background.
Okay, and can you tell us a little bit about the press coverage you've received for this so far?
Yeah, sure. So we focused our press coverage around the first conference that we held. So we held the first of what were going to be 3 international meetings. The first one was in Cambridge. We are the UK leads, although we work with 5 schools locally, and one of our schools was that hosted it. We invited our partners, and really, I think we had about, gosh, I can't remember, 50 odd people come to Cambridge to not just for the partner meeting, but for a training session. And that was what we used as the focus for our sort of launch coverage, essentially. And we did get good coverage in the local, there's a main local, well, there's a local daily paper called Cambridge News. And then there's the Cambridge Independent, which has been, which is a weekly publication. We do a lot of work with Cambridge Independent, and they gave us a nice piece of coverage, which I think you showed there. But you know, what they used is lots of images. This is very low tech, isn't it? And we can send these links if anyone wants to see them. But they actually they've covered it. There was also another publication which is, and I wanted to explain how this works. We belong to lots of membership organizations like Chambers of Commerce. In this case, it's something called Cambridge Network. And you can post your own news stories onto those platforms, and sometimes they pick them up and then circulate them as part of their newsletters if they think it's topical. So Cambridge Network covered it. We obviously put it on our own website, and then we use a lot of social media as well, LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook. So we push all of our news out through those channels too. And that's a nice way of reaching out to new people as well. So that was the way we went for coverage in those outlets. We hung it on that hook of the conference as our milestone, and the points that Lee was making about, identifying the key milestones is really important. We will probably do it again when our handbook gets published. And then we will also, because the Romanian conference isn't taking place, the actual final dissemination conference is going to be back again in Cambridge, probably next April. So we'll do some news around that too. Should I go into some of the reasons why I thought we've had some decent coverage? I mean,
yeah.
This is hopefully pulling out the points that Lee made earlier. We frame it, we think our topic was a quite broad interest. So 21st century skills for 21st century needs. You don't need to be just an educationalist to find that interesting. You can be a parent, you can be a business person. So it had that sort of broad appeal. We brought our business partners in for the conference, and we specifically invited the photographer. We did a photo call, and we invited photographers to come in when we had those business partners in, because we knew that people like Simon Humphrey from one of our leading companies in the city. It's called ARM. It's massive global tech chip makers. That you have ARM in your press release and you have a picture of Simon Humphrey, you're more likely to get into the paper. So that's the prominence piece. So, so that's another factor. The international element makes it newsworthy. Cambridge does get a lot of international activity. It's a very international city in many respects, but, it's still newsworthy to have teachers from Norway, Denmark, and Romania coming to Cambridge and to learn from what we learned together. So that was all, I would say, the good features. But I would also say that as an organization, we started 5 years ago with 2 of us, and we're now about 15 people. So we're still quite small in the big scheme of things, but we do punch above our weight for visibility. I think it might help that I started my career in PR, and I started in Safeway's press office 30 years ago. And so, you know, it's just, I'm the sort, like the previous speaker was saying, it's instinctive to me to think, should we be telling the press about this? Should we be trying to get some media coverage here? And so it is top of mind, more so than perhaps colleagues who may not think PR first. My tips on building good relationships. So for us, it's the local media is our main media source that we go for. I have taken some notes saying I need to do more with the education press, like FE News or Schools Week, and the idea of the British Council is fabulous, and hadn't thought about those outlets. We're very, local media is still important in this city. It's still, because they've also adapted and they do online versions of what they do. So we try to build and maintain good relationships with our local press. I try to get to know the editors personally. So I make sure I meet them, I go to their events, and, whilst of course everyone is super busy, I have discovered they're not averse to a free lunch or a drink if you can time it around like their print deadlines. And, I know that Cambridge Independent goes press day is Wednesday. So I say, Paul, what are you doing on Thursday? How would you like to have lunch at this new restaurant that opened? Now, I don't do that more than once every year or two, but because obviously but it's appreciated, I think. So, and it gives you that opportunity to really understand what their paper's all about, what they're trying to do in the community. And if you've got a big community project and program like we do, it's a natural partnership. But I would also say we do invest a little bit in advertising as well. And whilst editorial and advertising are separate, they are, but I think it just shows respect, essentially. And it's a bit of a quid pro, well, you're not supposed to use that term quid pro quo, particularly if you come from the country I come from. But yes, it is, there's a degree of, it's showing that, I think that we value the papers as a vehicle to communicate with our audiences. So whilst we didn't say, we're going to buy an advert, will you run this story? It's a bit of a long running relationship building thing. Those were kind of like my tips. So actually, no, if you want, I've got a few more, just my notes here. I think really the other thing is understand your media. So think about where you want to get coverage. Don't just blanket send it out to everybody. Think about which of the publications that you think are a natural home for the story you're trying to tell, what angles they might like. Customize it as much as possible. And think about, even columns your stories can fit into. I've tried that in the past to say, would you like to profile my young apprentice in your day in the life feature or something like that? You can really make it as, like Lee was saying, these papers are produced on a shoestring these days. It is really, people are very, very stretched. So the easier you can make it so they're not having to second guess, how could we use this information, the better. And you can take this into your consideration when you're pitching the stories. I think, then the other thing, I just wanted to say non-traditional media as well. So these membership groups, these professional bodies, and social media. Social media has been a great way of us building awareness. Good pictures are great. The one thing we haven't done with this, but taking part in this workshop today reminded me we must, is we've got a local TV program. I'm not talking BBC Look East, I'm talking Cambridge TV. And it's not massive in terms of coverage, but if you get featured on Cambridge TV, you can ask for, and they will supply you with a clip of that video which can then go onto your website. You can link to it through your socials, and you've suddenly got the opportunity to tell your story really well, really clearly through a visual medium, which is worth a lot. So yeah, those were some of my initial thoughts on what to do, how to do it.
That's brilliant. Have you faced any challenges while you've been doing all of this?
Yeah, well, I mean, Lee's absolutely right. We've sent that press release out to people who have completely ignored it as well. So you get lucky sometimes. You sometimes find that you haven't, it hasn't measured up in terms of newsworthiness at the time. It's always time consuming, and you want to be timely. That's the other thing. And I often have to kind of push some of my colleagues a little bit to say, guys, it's only news while it's new. Don't sit on this for 3 weeks and think the media are still going to take an interest. Of course, sometimes things can be repackaged into like an opinion piece, or maybe as a case study for something. Letters to the editor are another way to highlight work that you do. It's a sort of crafty way of getting into some of the publications, making a reference to something else that's been published and sort of then drawing attention to your own story. But yeah, so the challenge is there is a lot of competition for coverage, and you can't just assume what you produce is going to be selected.
Brilliant. Yeah, I think that's very true, really. Does anyone have any questions for Anne?
Well, not so much a question, Anne. Just really interested in the work that you're doing. You look like, sounds like you're really sort of like occupying a really important niche, really, and joining up a lot of resources and obviously adding value to that. You're a CIC, we're a CIC, and be really interested maybe in just swapping details, really, contact details, and talking more with you about work you're doing. There's a lot of similarities between what we're doing and what you're doing, and yeah, it'd be good to have a longer chat with you.
Okay. Sounds great. It's all about these connections, making connections, building partnerships, finding ways of working together. So I don't know, Heather, can you share contact details with the...
Yeah, if you're happy to share.
I've not got access to the chat. Otherwise, I would pop my details on the chat. But happy for you to share my contact details with anyone who wants to follow up separately.
Brilliant. I will do that.
Likewise, that really would go for anyone, really, if be happy to share my details. Thank you, Joanne.
Any other question?
Yeah, the question, that's okay. It's Ray, Global Learning Association. I've asked a question in the chat, but the presenters won't be able to see this. There comes a point where the Erasmus programme itself is quite unlikely to continue for the UK if what we're hearing at the moment is correct. Obviously, everything this year will be funded. That seems to be a guarantee. But the programme itself looks like it's going to come to an end. And that's really quite a political point. People reading these articles, and thanks to the presenters, both really good presentations, really interesting. Reading the articles that they're talking about, will probably look at Erasmus, and if they know anything about it at all, will think it's the higher education student mobility programme and nothing to do with the other sectors that you've mentioned. At what point is it prudent, worthwhile, or politically okay to mention that this programme that's brought all of these benefits is about to be brought to an end by the current administration? That is a political point, of course, and it's not necessarily a good news story. But if you're getting an audience for these press releases, it seems rather a waste not to mention that.
Yeah. I mean, I can say something on that, and I don't know whether Elaine wants to as well, but we try not to be too political as a CIC. We get we have public sector contracts as well as our private sector sponsorships and our traded services. And we try to go with issues rather than being too political. Having said that, we work very closely with all of our local MPs. Our local MP is a Labour MP he was one of the few Labour MPs who went against Jeremy Corbyn and actively said we should not be leaving the European Union when there was a bit, ambivalence. He's a Daniel Zeichner. He's a great champion of ours, and he's a great Europhile. If I said to Daniel, he has actually asked questions in Parliament on my behalf in the past for issues that I've raised that I've seen as being important. But I have to be careful because, on the other hand, we have a Conservative mayor who is a staunch Brexiteer who is across our regional patch. And we also get some funding from them too. So it's I hate to be like, it sounds, even hearing myself say that I have to be careful about being political about something that I feel very strongly about feels horrible to hear myself say that. But I do think one can raise the issue in a factual basis, going back to what Lee said, it's facts, not opinions sometimes. This program has been a real bonus to the schools in our area. It's really developed the professional, it's been very well received by the participating schools in terms of the professional development that the staff have got from it, from building these international networks. This work will no longer be available to us once we leave the EU and we no longer have access to Erasmus projects. We can put that out there as a statement of fact and say, I hope this will be taken into consideration and perhaps alternative provision can be made. And I think, but that's as far as I can go.
It's Elaine here. I think I'm going to possibly be a little controversial here and say that Erasmus programs are not political. They are designed to support student and staff mobility. And Erasmus programs happen globally. As I've said, we have projects outside of Europe, and we have been consulted because the government is in negotiations at the moment to retain aspects of the Erasmus Plus project. And that may be within the scope of Europe, or it may be a domestic alternative. So it will continue. It might look slightly different, but our understanding is that it will continue. So, what we do with our mobilities is what we do with our mobilities. It's not about making statements about the future of the Erasmus programme. So this is for the good of our students, the good of our staff. So political commentaries don't even come into the equation.
That's really helpful to be reminded of that, because it can feel very heated when you're referring to Europe in the public domain or any sort of EU affiliated program. So, but that's a great reminder, Elaine, that it is just an international program.
Do you feel like that answered your question, Ray?
Well, it would be unwise to put a political statement in a press release, but nevertheless, it is a policy of a particular arm of the of political opinion that we actually leave this program, and I'm not convinced at the moment, although this is a political point, I'm not convinced at the moment that that any part of it will be retained for the UK. And I think the EU has made it fairly plain that they don't feel at the moment like they want to tailor a very specific sub-program just for our benefit.
Go on, was someone about to add something there?
We can't go any further, really. That's as far as it goes, really.
Should I just add, I think from a point of view of ignoring politics in the current situation, just well, not ignoring politics, but if it's an individual and personal choice for organisations and people whether they want to get involved, I think, in political debates in the media. I think what we're talking about today and what what we're sort of hoping to help you all do is to promote your projects, which will equally promote the benefits of Erasmus Plus for however long it may or may not continue. If you want to then reactively comment on the current situation, or indeed any other political issues, it's an individual organisational decision to be made, and I think you, as Anne said, you need to be conscious that there could possibly be pros and some serious cons involved in doing that. And it basically depends how political you are as an organisation, or the people that run your organisation are, and that clearly varies across the sectors within Erasmus Plus anyway.
Sorry, I think you're right. I think it's possible to put a factual statement in about the current state of play, and that presumably would offend no one.
Yeah, I mean, and if obviously in the ongoing debate about what's going on, if media know that you're involved in European projects and contact you, and you feel and you wish to comment, then you're being asked to give your opinion. If you feel comfortable doing that, it's entirely up to you, and that's not really anything to do with us, the national agency, or anyone else. And if you feel that you might want to, even if a journalist doesn't contact you, might want to put yourself forward as someone who wants to comment on that, it's valid publicity, but you're obviously putting your foot in one camp or the other in doing that.
Yeah,
I'm trying to be sensitive about it, because we have to be careful about what we say. Obviously, we can't be seen to be lobbying or expressing a certain opinion. You, as beneficiaries, are in a slightly different position. But you just, things need to be carefully considered, I think, if you're straying into political territory. Basically for the purposes of what we're discussing today, as we said, it's better to stick to the facts and concentrate on promoting what have been the benefits of and what are the benefits of the programme, really.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Because that will equally help the political positions one way or another.
Can I just add something to that? And I know it is very tempting, and we can all feel the temptation to air our views, which we feel very strongly about. But we actually had a situation around Brexit where my colleague and fellow owner commented on it on our Facebook page, and it alienated companies that we work with to provide placements for us in Glasgow, because they were on the other side of the fence. So over and above longer term implications, it really caused problems for us, because she was voicing her opinion on the company's Facebook page, and somebody else objected to it. And actually, it wasn't a company, it was a charity. And I mean, it's kind of a charity we'd worked with for a long time. And it can do so much damage. I mean, I personally feel very strongly about it, but have to kind of bite my tongue. And I also know of voluntary organisations in the past that I've been involved with who have lost their funding because they've been vocal about things like the local authority and what they're doing, and Scottish Government too, I have to say, and they have lost their funding. So I think there's a we do feel strongly, but we have to be really, really careful, about what we say and how we say it.
Yeah, I think, it's a good point. It's all very sensitive stuff, really, isn't it? Did anyone else have any questions around the case studies? No, are we okay? Okay. I mean, do continue to add questions into the chat box as well, and we can always come back to them later. Does anyone need a break? Does anyone need a cup of tea or to nip to the loo, or are we okay to power on through?
Heather, it's Elaine here. Sorry, I'm going to have to duck out. I have another meeting scheduled. So just want to say thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak today. I hope that there were a few little pieces of information which would be helpful to other people. And if anybody would like to get in contact with me, just give them my email address and I'd be happy to connect. So thank you very much, everybody.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Elaine. It was great to have
Okay.
you.
All the best. Bye-bye.
Bye. Okay, how does everyone else feel? Power through? Have a break? I'm going to take silence as power through. Yep, I'm seeing nods. Okay, we're powering on through. Okay, so we were now going to jump to having a little bit of a discussion session. So this is the best time for you to all turn on your mics, turn on your cameras if you'd like to. Let me just find my presentation. Yes, so as the first poll didn't seem to work so well, I think it would be best if we do this one maybe using the raise your hand function, I think. So currently, do you use press releases as part of your project's promotion and dissemination activities? So do you want to maybe use the raise your hand function first, and we can see how many people are using them? Not everybody by the looks of it, so it does look about just less than, maybe about half and half. Okay, that's interesting to see. So, okay, this is maybe a question then more if you want to discuss verbally. Do you have a strategy in place for working with the media? I imagine those of you who potentially aren't using press releases maybe don't. Does anyone want to kick off?
We don't have a strategy in place, but recognise that it is something that we do need to develop, and part of the reason for doing the training today is to look at how we might develop that as an organisation.
Is there anyone who does have one who wants to share maybe how it's worked for them? Has no one got a strategy? Is this the answer? It's absolutely fine to say no one has a strategy. We won't be offended as comms people, I promise. No? Okay. I'll jump in with my next question then. Which elements of Erasmus Plus projects do you think are most newsworthy? What do you think will perform best in the news? Perhaps those of you who aren't using the press as a medium, what works well for you on social media? I think those two things often overlap quite a lot. Come on, somebody talk to me.
Okay.
I'll talk to you. Hi. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, yes.
Yes, sorry, yeah. It tends to be, I'm sort of based in the Lake District up in Keswick, small area, but we've been bringing volunteers in on previously EVS and lately Solidarity Corps projects. And there's a sort of fair novelty of these international people coming to work in the UK. There's a lack of knowledge generally about the Erasmus Plus projects, so Erasmus Plus itself becomes newsworthy locally, and also because we've been doing environmental-based projects, it's the fact that the young people are coming in and helping with local projects as well, and working with local charitable and non-profit organisations generally. And specifically, we have another one where we've got young people under EVS have come and worked at the local Calvert Trust Centre, which is a specialist outdoor education centre for people with disabilities. So, I mean, they're all really good news things, sort of helping the local community and helping local non-profit and social enterprise. So.
Trevor, can I just say something that's really interesting, because we don't use the press enough, and we should do. But talking about the Calvert Trust, and this was incoming a few years ago. I met the Calvert Trust at an event in Glasgow, and I'd known them, I'd used them in the past when I lived in England, and told them what I did. And they said, "Oh, have you thought of working with us?" And I said, "Oh, well, it's Northumberland, travelling." And I thought, actually, I could do it. And I placed some German nurses, student nurses with them. And we worked out a really good program. And one of them, it was so successful that she came back at the end of it to work for them, because she had such a great experience. And really, we missed the opportunity. And I think it's because in the past I've worked in organisations who have had press officers, so we really don't interact with the press now. And I think there's something that we need to do much more. But the thing that we do have is we do use social media. But for us, what would make the press, if we had the time, the strategy to do it, is that our outgoing projects, one in particular, it is completely life-changing for them. It's for people in recovery. And we do have then news stories which are published in reports and external evaluations and things like that. But we don't do anything with the press, and we need to change that.
Yeah, it's a funny one here locally, because we actually have a local newspaper for Keswick called the Keswick Reminder, which has an incredible penetration amongst the local population. It hasn't been through COVID because of everything's happened, but we can virtually get any story in that, and occasionally then it's picked up by other regional papers. So you can actually sometimes find a route into regional press by going through very, very local press, because sometimes they are sharing their stories with other papers as well. But having said that, that's not a strategy, and one of our weaknesses is that we don't have it as a strategy. It tends to be a very ad hoc thing and depends upon the capacity in our very small organization. So but it's very important, obviously.
Is this a common feeling among people that capacity is the main reason for not doing this sort of thing?
Yeah, 100% capacity. But that's it.
Yeah, just say we in a Key Action 201 project, we encouraged all our partners when the project was launched to put out a press release, gave them some guidance as to the sort of things they could put in the press release, and we also had a dissemination log. And they all dutifully did do the press release. Obviously, some of them were in languages we couldn't read it instantly till we Google translated them. They all looked pretty good. But looking through the dissemination log, as the project proceeded, I don't think anyone then used the local press very much, if at all, which is a shame. Certainly from my experience, young people getting together and doing something is far more likely to attract media attention. Rather sadly, when I was at the university, the press used to be invited to a group of visitors standing in a line, and that and of course they very rarely turned up. Understandably, young people getting together, doing something particularly in the community, is very often the key. Will raise interest.
That's a valid point. As I said earlier, the press are keen to see people doing things, action, rather than people stood still in a line, as you say. I think equally it's worth making a point that I think it's a common issue in smaller organisations, and you wouldn't necessarily need a detailed strategy, but I think an awareness, which you seem to have, most of you, judging from the comments, of what is newsworthy, is a start. And even if you're only sending out ad hoc press releases, you're halfway there. You are sort of developing a relationship with the local media, and they're aware of you. So even though there's nothing strategic about it, the next time you send a press release, if you've given them a good story, they'll be more inclined to take notice. I mean, if you're a small organisation with limited resources, it's still doable, I think, is the message to take away. So
other than capacity, is there anything else that is putting people off contacting the media? No, so it sounds like you all know exactly what you need to do, just haven't got the time to do it, which I think is a very common problem, to be honest. So I suppose at the last kind of question that we were looking at is, if you have contacted the media before, who have you contacted? And if you haven't, what sort of audience do you think your projects would be most aimed at?
I'll have a go. Yeah, as I say, with us mostly it's been local print media with the town, and then with the sort of we have here Cumberland News Group. Then they publish right across Cumbria, and we have had some coverage through BBC Radio, and once appeared on Border Television. So that's really exciting stuff. But yeah, and it tends to be a sort of, in this area, a small media world. But you know, we try as much as possible. It tends to be more through social media as you're trying to go national and international. And when we've run conferences, even in London and things like that, it's very, very difficult to sort of get coverage. Although we've even tried sending stuff to the London Evening Standard, and with no joy. So
yeah.
How
did you go about getting the radio coverage?
That was through a journalist contact who knew a person working in BBC Radio, and we were doing a particular project with Carlisle Youth Zone, and there was quite a bit of interest, local interest at the time, on the recovery of Carlisle Youth Zone from the floods, you know, the big floods in Cumbria and things like that. And so that sort of brought the interest in as well. Again, it was through European volunteering. We had some European volunteers working for Carlisle Youth Zone. So that sort of picked it up. So I think it's as Lee said before, it's having the right angle, it's having the interest, and you know, and timing. You know, it's a particular thing. In this case, it was flood recovery, and it tied in nicely with an international project. So, yeah.
Yeah, mentioning floods there, it's obviously there's been lots of floods in various areas around the country now. If you can tap into the general news agenda, obviously floods were in the news quite a lot for quite a while, and then if you can tap into the news agenda, again, your stuff becomes more newsworthy. I think now, as we've been talking about local radio and BBC local radio, I mean, that's probably quite an often ignored, but could be a fruitful avenue for people, because they're pretty local. They've got a bit of resource, being the BBC, although they're moaning about all the cuts, and it's largely talk based, so they've got a lot of time to fill, and they're interested in talking to people. And similarly, mentioning social media, as some of you have and are on the chat, although we've talked about writing a press release, social media can be equally effective in reaching journalists. Journalists live on social media to an extent these days, especially Twitter, and if they're not picking up your press release, it might be just as easy to publish it on your own website and just tweet the link at the journalist, because you can be sure they're reading Twitter.
Does anyone else have anything else that they wanted to raise as part of this discussion?
I would just follow what Lee said there. In a separate capacity, I'm involved with a sports club, and quite often we will put out announcements, reports, or anything on website and on our Facebook pages, and our Twitter feeds as well, and it does get picked up by the local press. So, and particularly with everything that's happening around the COVID situation now, and trying to get back to sport, and they're desperate to because the content seems to have disappeared mostly on the sports pages anyway. So yeah, it's having the right subject and the timing.
I think positive news stories is something everybody wants at the moment as well. So if you can say something nice about nice things that are going on in your community, I think people do really need that and want to hear it right now.
Sure.
Okay, well, if no one else has anything else for this, I will hand back over to Lee to do a little bit of an activity, just to sum up everything that we've gone over today.
Okay, thanks, Heather. Just see if I have got control, whether I can move the slides on. Okay, so here we go, a little activity. Obviously, we spoke a little bit about the importance of the intro when I was speaking earlier. We've just got a couple of examples here that we're going to look at and discuss briefly, see what we think. So if we take a look at this first one, Heather, we've got that little problem with the black box again.
I'm trying to use my mouse, but it has disappeared at the moment.
There's a slight glitch in technology.
How's that?
No, it's better now, although we have moved on 2 slides now. Bear with us, folks. I'm going the wrong way with the slides now. Okay, here we go. This is the first one. Obviously, talking about the intro, if people wanted to take a look at this and read through this, what are our thoughts about this as an intro? Does it do the job? Could it be improved? Has that first paragraph there even got the main facts and the most interesting points of that content? Give you 20 seconds to read it. Has anyone got any views on that, or how it can be improved? Does it need improving? Yes, no?
I think you're going to make more of an impact if you have the 12% increase, 100 million further up.
Okay, yeah, that's good. We're getting there.
In the first sort of the first sentence / paragraph.
Yeah, that's good. It's good. Anybody got any more views?
I was going to say the same thing. The 100 million is a very attractive. It draws their attention, doesn't it? So.
Yeah, good. We all seem to be on the right lines there. Here is.
I would probably go for kind of something that grabs their attention, like really kind of startling.
Yeah.
How can we access share of a 12% increase in EU funding locally, or something like that? You know, I know you said W, but the how and when to me is, that's asking the question. I just think that grabs people's attention.
Yeah, you wouldn't normally start a news story or a press release with a question, but I mean, obviously, if you're talking locally and you have the relevant information to break down the figures locally, then it would certainly be a valid thing to sort of pick that out at a local level. But obviously, yeah, this is as you were talking about there. This is what I would say would be the much better way of approaching that story. So yes, as you rightly pointed out, the key fact is that a record £100 million worth of European funding will be available to the UK in 2019. So we've answered what the record £100 million worth of funding, where in the UK and when in 2019. I think it was mentioned the 12% increase is also worth pointing out, but for me that's possibly not until the second paragraph. And then you add that sort of why we know this, because it was revealed today when the European Commission, which is who obviously as well, published the 2019 call for applications. So I think in those 2 paragraphs it's much more snappy, going in with what I feel is the key fact there, and we've answered all the 5 W's in those first 2 paragraphs. Okay, I'll just quickly, before we finish, have a look at one other one. Okay, how about this one? It's a little bit more information here, a little bit more thinking might be required, but do we think, or what do we think is the key information here? Do we think that this is the best way of writing it as an intro and subsequent paragraph? Anybody got any thoughts on that one once you've had a few seconds to read it?
My first reaction is to move on.
The interesting side to me would be the opportunities for young people. So again, I would be, you know, to take, you know, the travel, the exchanges. So I'd be moving that up to the top paragraph, and then the whole bit about Lloyd Russell Moyle and the chair of the all-party parliamentary group, etc., further below. I might not even mention Lloyd Russell Moyle in the first paragraph. More about what the actual initiative is.
Okay, interesting. I think you've got your beneficiary, your project deliverer hat on there. Anyone else got any views? I mean, there's obviously obviously I follow the general rules, but there's no right or wrong way to do this necessarily. I'm just advising you what I think is best to get your thing covered in the newspaper. But even to do it right, there's not one set answer. There could be 10, 15, 20 different ways to write a good intro for any given set of facts and any given information. But equally, there'll be a lot more ways to do it wrong, or a lot more ways that won't increase your chances of getting it picked up or published. Anybody got any more views? No, let's move on. I mean, slightly different to Trevor, and going back to the point about prominence, I took the view that Lloyd Russell Moyle is an MP. Anything he says or does will be of interest. So bringing him in right at the start will make this newsworthy. So I've put it as obviously he comes in right at the start, and that's the who. But then equally, the opportunities for young people is important. So the fact that he's backed a new initiative aiming to provide these opportunities for young people through volunteering and work opportunities. I think further detail about what the opportunities are and how they are organised would probably come in further down, would certainly come in further down. So I think we've got the who and the what in the intro there. And possibly the why in that second paragraph. He is interested in backing this is because he's the chair of the all-party parliamentary group for youth affairs. And then when and where at the launch of the Solidarity Corps in London. So that's going a slightly different route to the one Trevor would have taken, maybe. But as I say,
something there. Sorry to interrupt. And this
Yep.
is not a statement. This is a fact that if you are in Scotland, the fact an MP is backing it wouldn't attract an audience. That's just a fact.
okay, is that
Yeah.
down to a difference in culture or general scepticism of MPs?
Well, it is a difference in culture, and it is the fact that you know, people listen more to people in Scotland than they do across the UK. As I say, it's not political. It's just a simple fact that, you know, it's in Scotland. It is definitely about bashing Westminster. Let's be honest. So but that's the community. So therefore, you know, if you want coverage and you want people to respond, then putting an MP's name at the start of it wouldn't necessarily be the most effective. So I'm not saying I think it looks really good like that. I'm just saying that it wouldn't necessarily work in Scotland. So I hope people won't take offence at that. But I know where I work and live.
No, well, as I say, and that's it. That's as much part of it. If you know your audience and know what works for them, then obviously all of these hints and tips can flex, and you can, you know, equally you can try different approaches and see what works best over time. You know, if you've got the time to do that, it might mean that maybe the odd press release isn't picked up until you hit the right approach for your audience or your geographical area. But yeah, it's nothing is set in stone. This is just what I sort of feel is the best approach as a former journalist. And obviously this is one particularly where there could possibly have been several different approaches by the sound of it.
Yeah, you might stress the
overall,
all-party parliamentary group aspect there, and forget about the fact that it was the MP doing the speaking, because it does say all-party.
Yeah, fine. Okay, anybody with any other thoughts on that? That was just a quick little bit of fun, really. Otherwise, I can hand back to Heather, and I think we're nearly finished.
Great, thank you, Lee. Hopefully you found that session useful. I think we're probably ready to wrap up about there. Thank you so much for joining us. Like I said, I do hope it was helpful. Before we oh no, it's not letting me. Before we finish up, we just thought it might be a nice little thing for social media if we could take a little picture of everyone, if everyone's happy with that. Anyone who would like to have their camera on and be involved in the picture. I don't know how well, we'll see how many photos we can get on screen at one time. But it would just be really nice to celebrate our first virtual event.
Heather.
Yes.
I was just going to ask if you could, if before everyone disappears or even before you disappear, whether I could go back and take a screenshot of the slide introducing us, because again, just in this example of how it's so nice to use social media, I would then share it, tag you guys as well. So, you know.
Do you want it with Teams so that every you can see everyone?
It would be nice with
the
Teams.
chat.
I can make the point that it was part of a virtual.
yeah, certainly. Okay, well let's take this photo then, and then I can go back to that for you.
Yeah.
Sarah, if you want to give us a shout when you've taken the picture, that would be great.
Yeah, that's fine. So right, just making sure all the interface is clean so we can see everyone. Okay, that's brilliant. Thanks, everyone.
Oh, smiling like Cheshire Cats here. Great. Okay. Well, thank you very much, everyone. We will be putting a little feedback survey into the chat. If you can't see the chat, maybe I can find some other way to send you the feedback survey. We would be really grateful if you could fill it in. It's only short, but especially because this is the first time we've done one of these events, it would really help us to improve on it for the next one. The next one is on Wednesday the 8th, and it is focusing on sharing your project successes on social media. And we do have a few places left if anyone would like to join us for that one. Yes, so I think the form is now in the chat box if you're interested, and I will just go back to that slide. Give me 2 seconds to find the slide. But we will stick around for a little bit if anyone has any questions that you want to ask us. Yeah, we will be available. There we go. Hopefully you should be able to see that now, I think.
Thank you for coming. Oh, thank you so much. That's really cool. I really appreciate that.
No problem.
And also our whole project is like, tell us about anything that we get in terms of visibility. You know, it's part of the whole dissemination, isn't it? So it's important that we share it. Thank you.
No, that's fine.
We actually have a project, K2 project, and part of our examination plan is we've created a PowerPoint presentation to send out to local partners, and each partner's commissioned to do that. But we're not doing anything with the press, and I think that's something we really need to do now. That we're very keen, and we have a website for the project, and we have a Facebook page, but we're not interacting with the press. I need to do my part.
Hopefully you've got some ideas from today. So, and if you need any help, you can always contact us at the comms team, and we can do our best to give some advice if you need a second pair of eyes.
Thanks, Heather. Really, my challenge is that because of the current situation, I'm the only person working in our organisation because we've had to furlough people.
Yeah, I think it is a big challenge at the moment. Unfortunately, that there seems to be a lot of people in that position that we've spoken to.
Yeah, so I'm trying to do the work of a number of people.
Yeah.
We'll get there.
You'll come out of it, and you'll be a master of everything, and you'll be like, "Huh, we don't need other people."
No, I don't think so. But we got good news yesterday because we got 2 K1 projects approved.
Oh, that's good news. Something you could write a press release on, perhaps.
I was thinking because it is. I mean, it's big news for us as an organisation. So I'll need to. The problem is I can't actually consult with my colleagues because they're on furlough.
Yeah.
Because the HMRC are very strict. But I'll think of ways of doing it. Yeah, I was thinking the press release. It would be good because it's a big. Well, the 2 different projects. So